It's my honor and privilege at this time to introduce to some and present to others tonight's guest live on Luminous Radio, Baba Ashra Kwesi and Brother Kojo Lee.
Honored to be on it through the knowledge radio.
The honor is definitely ours.
Appreciate the work. Appreciate the work you do.
Yes, Santi, brother. Well, it's great to have radio stations like this to help disseminate information for liberation. You truly got a African Communiversity radio show going on here.
Definitely an honor. I mean, just being a student of so many of our great ancestors, you know, the ancestral lineage that extends from my family into our nuclear family and to so many brothers and sisters all around the world. We have a tremendous responsibility in regards to what we essentially are talking about today in preserving our African heritage. Because as we can see through a multiplicity of mediums, it is definitely under attack. So I definitely am honored to be able to dialogue with you, Baba Kwesi, and you, Kojo, on this timely topic of preserving our African heritage. I'm pretty sure everybody is acquainted with your work and all of you have done, Baba Kwesi, but if you could take a few minutes and give the family a brief introduction of yourself.
Well, again, honored to be on the radio show, brother, to disseminate information for liberation. I want to thank Brother Kojo and Brother Akbar for putting on the upcoming Communiversity that will be in December, December 3rd. So, again, especially at this time of the year when it's the epitome of white supremacy, and I started my journey many years ago. I did not know information about this, and I met a man named Dr. Yosef Ben-Yakinen that we affectionately know as Dr. Ben at Long Beach State back in 1973. At that time, being in the Black Power movement, at that time we were dealing with the political movement at that time, the Gestapo beast, the LAPD, still doing the same thing now as they were doing then, and that's shooting brothers down in the street. Even though the political consciousness was there, I realized that we didn't have a lot of historical consciousness about who we are, and above all, our black divinity was not intact, and as well as our black deity. Unfortunately, when warriors fall in the battleground and we find ourselves in churches with white Jesuses over us, so I realized something was wrong with that. And when I met Dr. Ben and he filled in the historical information about who we are as an African people and filling in the whole black divinity as well as the black deity, the black God, coming from African people who brought the whole spirituality to the world, where many others have copied it and corrupted it. So after that lecture, I asked Dr. Ben, can you prove what you said here today? Because I was highly impressed about what he said. And he said, young man, not only can I prove it, but I can take you back and show you. And that's the first time someone told me that they can actually show me. And he went on to say that, but above all, we need young people like you to go back and do the field research. And he walked away. So that was inspiration for me to return back to Africa, because no one never told me that, hey, it's there. You can see it. I can take you and show you. And I started to save my money, and I made that journey in 1981. And little did I know at that time that I would do just that with Dr. Ben, doing the field research with him and apprentice under him for 14 years. And now 35 years nonstop, returning back to Africa, to Kemet, annually every year, as well as going to other places, as I did with Dr. Ben, to Sudan, ancient Kush, as well as present-day Ethiopia and West Africa as well as traveling to other places around the world and dissemination of information for liberation. So this has been a long journey, and when you're on a journey like this here, you can't even think the fact that, over 3 decades seems to me to be less than 10 years. But, of course, when you're on a journey and on a mission, you get into a time warp, and that's what I've been in. So the Grandmaster Teacher, peace be upon him, Dr. Ben, who have liberated so many with his work, and he been the first one that actually started to bring brothers and sisters back to liberate their minds in terms of going back to the original Taneta land. And when I say Taneta land, I'm talking about the original Holy Land. Most of the time we think of Holy Land, we automatically our minds go to Jerusalem or places like that, whereas the world's first recorded Holy Land was right there in Kemet that we call, Europeans actually call Egypt today. Mm-hmm.
I know that we got this great lecture coming up here, December the 3rd, the day before the transition of Fred Hampton Sr. With that historical significance, something that you just mentioned, Baba Kwesi, that through line where you have the physical and the metaphysical connection that you recognized in the 70s that wasn't there. And you could also see that same kind of cultural, ideological divide today with regards to, okay, you got the brothers and sisters with the crystals on this side, and you got the brothers and sisters with the rifles on the other side. So through your study, your research, and your travel, all of that, what would you say is the best approach to meld these ideologies together to show that we are a united people, and every part and every aspect of us as African people is necessary?
Yes. Well, every aspect, you're right on the latter part of your statement. Every aspect of us as an African people is very important. But just a little correction there. I didn't mention during that time metaphysical. I was saying
that was a term that I was using to kind of surmise what you were saying.
In terms of my consciousness and related to the black divinity and black spirituality, that's pretty much I was relating it to at that time, and actually still do. In terms of when we associate with our whole spirituality relating to our deity, that means, or our God, is always looked at as white idolatry. But in terms of, in relationship to your question and what you were saying, of course, there are many, it's like a classroom. We can't go to one class and think we have all the answers. There are many people teaching on many different levels. And I say as long as that knowledge is related to us as an African people, peace be upon him, another Grandmaster teacher, Dr. Clark, would say, take what you do best and do it for your people. So as long as that's working for us, and the information that's been disseminated for education for liberation, and that's how we have to look at it. There are many different people dealing with metaphysical science. There are people dealing with historical and spirituality, some of the areas that I'm dealing with. So there are many different aspects. But as long as their intentions and their purpose is about the liberation of our people and the education of our people and the building of our people, then, of course, that's an open ground. As I always say, if we use an analogy, if you take a mirror and put it up to your face, you see your face, but if someone knocks it on the ground, that mirror breaks up into many pieces. But you can't pick up one piece of that mirror and put it back up to your face and see your face. You can only see a part of your face, maybe your eye, maybe your nose, but you can't see your whole face. So it takes many of us to pick those pieces up, depending on what your interest is, and reconstruct that with the many other pieces for us to see ourselves again. So I call it the eye in the broken glass syndrome, meaning that I don't have all the answers, but I have a piece of the information based off of the field research as I open up with the introduction when Dr. Ben said we need young people like you to go back and do the field research. So that was the interest that I had, that we can actually return back to Africa and do the field research at the ancient monuments and temples. And there's so many areas in that area, even alone, that one can get into. The study of the Medu Neter. One can get into architectural study. One can get into the study of the tombs. I mean, there's just so much. We're talking about thousands of years of civilization here. In relationship to why the lecture is at this particular time, this is the epitome of white supremacy during this time of the year. And the reason why I say it's the epitome of white supremacy, because this is a time of white idolatry, or the worship of white folks. And it's come during a time when black folks find themselves really at a very, very low level of consciousness. And the reason is because we're bombarded with television, and they start singing Christmas carols and all these kind of things to us. So our people get in like a hypnotic state, all right, and don't even realize the fact that they're spending up all their money, they're maxing out their credit cards, And all around, as the images are shown to them constantly, all around the birth, as they are told, many of our people are told, a birth of a white baby. So this is why I call it the epitome of white supremacy and also white idolatry, or the worship of white images. So ancient Kemet gives us the information where many Europeans came in and copied many of the spiritual ideas of the holy birth, of the real meaning of what the Christ represents. This is a time to expose our people to this information. It's been over there for thousands of years before the Western world was even in existence. When we look at the original holy birth, okay, when we look at the Immaculate Conception, these are things that our people have been indoctrinated into to believe in from the time of our Ma'afa, kidnapped from Africa, forced into slavery. This is all we have known. And white folks have shown us these images, but we have not known that this is a corruption of the ancient African spirituality that our ancestors documented in Kemet for thousands of years. So when we look at that early trinity, when we look at Asar, Aset, and Haru, we're talking about this is the early spirituality. There was no Western version of Christianity yet. There was no Judaism yet. There was no Islam yet. There was no Buddhism yet. There was no Krishna. All these things did not exist yet that we see during the time when our ancestors created in that Zeptepi, or that first time of creation, where our ancestors, in the spiritual story where Asar and Aset were created simultaneously. There was no rib taken from Asar to make Aset, all right, that we see that in the misogyny in the Western the Genesis story, which is a Greek word that means the beginning, where the rib was taken from Adam to make Eve. This is nothing but misogyny. Whereas in African spirituality was based off of Ma'at. And there in that Ma'atian story, the creation of Asar and Aset simultaneously, as well as we see evil also existed, or Isfet. Yes, an evil brother named Set, okay, who kills Asar because he was a good man. This is the world's first story that we know in the Western version in the Hebrew text or the Old Testament as Cain and Abel. That originated from Asar and Aset, where the evil brother kills the good brother. But in that story, it's Aset, after he was killed by Aset, who got 72 conspirators to do this. Here we see on the temples and tombs, and let's go to the world's first holy city called Abtu, that the Arabs referred to as Abydos. These are real places. In the 19th dynasty, over 3,000 years ago, here we see Seti I build a temple there. In the Ptah Soka shrine, we see the world's first Immaculate Conception, where Aset takes the seed from Asar to impregnate herself to have this Immaculate Conception and holy birth. Let's go to another temple, deep into Nubia or Ta-Nehisi. There we see the Madonna and child. There we see her lactating. There we see her lactating the holy child, Haru. This is where Theodosius in the 4th century, as well as Justinian in the 6th century, came and chiseled her out. You can still see the print where the European Byzantine Christians came in, Roman Byzantine Christians came in and chiseled her out. Why? Why did they chisel out a set, okay, in the formation of the Madonna and child? They chiseled her out because they were copying this story. The Western world did not have this story. And by trying to chisel it out from the temple of Aset, still there, one can see where Aset is lactating the holy child. When we see the European version of the Mary and Jesus, okay, this is nothing but a plagiarized version, as well as a corruption of the African spirituality of Asar and Aset, okay, that we see there. In fact, this is the Madonna and child is also referred to as the Black Madonna. Okay, she is the Black Madonna because at one time the Greeks, who were some of the early Europeans that came in, and then after them, here we see the Romans came in, they carried Aset throughout their empire, known as the Herculean worship of the goddess Aset. So when we go to Gaul, which is now called France today, and we see the Black Madonna in Notre Dame, not only do we see the same exact story, and we see the Black Madonna, she's the Black Madonna in France because at one time that is Aset. So when the Western version of Byzantine Roman Christians came and corrupted the story, they took the story, she still remains black, but she's called Mary. Okay, Mary, that's the Kemetic name. It came from the ancient Medu Neter. Murray, that's where we get the term, came from Murray, that means love, where they changed that to Mary. One account after the other that we can see these stories. When the Romans carried her throughout their empire, throughout Europe, the Black Madonna is still there, but they don't tell you that that is Aset, where she remained black when the Western version of Christianity took over. Let's go to her temple, carved in stone to this day and you can see the heliacal rising of a star called Cybele Sipta. Cybele Sipta, who the Romans called Ceres and the Greeks called Sothis, is the heliacal rising of that star that told our ancestors that a Set was going to have this holy birth, and the rising of that star told that it'd be a Haru that we born December the 25th. Let's go to another temple called the Temple of Het-Heru. Okay, the temple also, as they call Hathor. There we see right there on that temple that I take our groups annually every year, and a chapel where Haru is born in this chapel. Okay, so here we get the story of Jesus, the Serapis Jesus I prefer to call, because that's a creation, okay, from the time of the Ptolemies that led into the Byzantine Roman Christians, who they took and made this character, who they called Jesus, okay, from Serapis, who they started and created in Egypt. We know this is a lot of information here. Some people may be hearing this for the first time. It may sound very confusing to some of our people. But once we come with the visual documentation, because one of the things that we have lost as a people is chronology. And that chronology is following step by step, systematically how these things were copied from the temples and tombs. And this is the reason why they did everything to keep us away from Egypt. But back to Dandara. There we see the Het-Heru. Here we see is the surrogate mother, okay, of Heru. What is her symbol? Okay, her Zoop type, okay, or zoomorphic form, okay, that they use is a cow, okay, for Het-Heru. Why would they use a cow? Because the cow represents the great mother, that feeds from the great mother earth. So that becomes the surrogate mother for Heru, all right, at this temple. You see her there with the goddess face, and you see her there with the cow's ears, but you also see her in her zoomorphic form as a cow itself. So the question that we've got to ask when we look at the Yule Tide or the images that we see in Western version of Christian art, why is that cow in the manger? Nobody asked these questions. Is that animal worship? I mean, when they come to Kemet and they see Hathor on the temples of Egypt, then they say that's animal worship. But yet when you look at the pictures in the Yule Tide and look at the pictures of the cow in the manger, nobody says that's animal worship. That cow is in the manger. Why? Because that is symbolic of Het-Heru. That's who that is, the surrogate mother of Heru that they put in the Yuletide pictures. I show in the presentations and lectures where we see that Het-Heru and the Heru king under Het-Heru, under the cow, the same exact way as you see in the European Christian art. So these are some of the things that we've got to understand. Our ancestors saw from when they looked at from a solar perspective as well as a stellar perspective. The stellar is the star that I just spoke of, that star that will rise in the east. At December the 25th, precisely, this happens annually for thousands of years from the time that the earth has been rotating around the sun. Precisely at December the 25th is the birth of the sun, all right? We're talking about the sun sun. It's at the depth of winter. That's why right now it's getting darker and darker and darker. The sun will go all the way down, but precisely at December the 25th, the sun will be born again. Our ancestors saw this solar event. They took Heru and personified him with the sun, that he would be born at December the 25th. Now, let's look at the goddess Aset. When we look at the constellation of Virgo that we're coming out of, that's the sun. Symbolically, our ancestors saw that here we see that Virgo is giving birth to the sun that's going to be born at December the 25th. That becomes Het-Heru. Sometimes this may sound confusing talking about it. That's why we've got to look at the images and the pictures and the representations for us to see it, because our people do not know about cosmology. We don't know about cosmological things that take place, just like in the spring. That's the birth of the sun. That's the resurrection of the sun. That's why they have Easter during that time, and they take this Serapis Jesus, and he becomes personified as the resurrection. So this is what I mean by white idolatry. We get caught into worshiping of this white Jesus and not realize that this is a cosmological event that our ancestors observed thousands of years ago, that we get caught into this image. When you see the sun behind that European Jesus head when he's a baby at December the 25th in the manger, they tell you right there that's the sun at December the 25th. When you see the sun behind the European version of the Mary and the Yuletide, okay, or the nativity scene as they call it, that's the sun in the constellation of Virgo. when you see that star right above, perpendicular to that Serapis Jesus, that's the helical rising of the star Sibyl Septa. It's all cosmology, but we couldn't see it because we were taught to worship white images. So this is the importance, precisely at this time of the year, to get into this presentation so we can understand how we've been brainwashed, how we have been duped, and above all, how we've been put into spiritual and psychological enslavement when the enemy becomes the deity in the spiritual subconscious of our mind. This is the worst form of enslavement. The worst form of enslavement is spiritual enslavement, when the enemy becomes the deity. So this is what I meant by the black divinity that was missing when back in the 70s when my friend was shot down by the LAPD, and then we go to the church, and the first thing we see over him is a white Serapis Jesus. So this is where we see that out there fighting the very beast that's shooting us down, looks like the very image of the police that shot my friend down is the white Serapis Jesus. So that's when I realized that something was wrong, and I realized that I had to return back to Africa with Dr. Ben so we can walk through the books in stones. And so many years. This was not something that came to me overnight. It was many years that I had to research, going through many of the temples where you can see blatantly, okay, these stories. Many of the guides over there don't reveal these stories because of the many Europeans. It would upset their paradigm and their white supremacy worldview, because once you're able to see the relief and people point the reliefs out, then you can see clearly. I mean, a very lay person who's totally oblivious to this knowledge can clearly see that these things were literally copied directly from our ancestors thousands of years ago. And these are some of the things that we're going to be looking at in the presentation so we can understand exactly what this is all about. Even the name Christmas. Christmas comes from the ancient Kemetic word that means Ka-mes. That means Ka means spirit, and Mes means birth. They took that idea from ancient Kemet and called it Christmas. Okay, where our ancestors saw Ka had nothing to do with the physical body, but a spiritual resurrection, okay, a spiritual birth that we all go through. Even when we leave the physical body, the spiritual body is going to rise up. The Romans didn't understand it. They just literally took it literally that it would be the physical body that will get up out the grave and go to heaven. But it was the Ka-mes. It was the spiritual birth, generally seen with two arms up. That's the glyph, the Medu-Neter glyph for the spirit, or two arms up. We pretty much are familiar with it in the church when people go to the church and get the, as I call it, the African Holy Ghost, and they throw their arms up in the air and start running around. And I say, well, that's the African Ka. That spirit is taking place in them. And that's what we see there. But even the name Christmas is taken from the ancient Medu-Neter, Ka-mes. It means spiritual birth. That I revealed this to brothers and sisters on the temples and tombs as we travel throughout Kemet, as well as many other spiritual ideas. So that's the importance of this presentation, as is titled The African Spirituality, the Origin of Christianity, and the Birth of the Black Christ. When we understand the Black Christ, we've got to understand what that means. We're talking about we are all a Christ. But most of the time, because of the brainwashing and the indoctrination that has taken place to us, we think of a Christ. First thing that regurgitates up in our psychic is a white Jesus. No, it had nothing to do with a white Jesus. Okay, it has to do with a spirit rising up of our spirit. So the Black Christ, that's us. These early Africans, during the time of the Romans, there was a group of Africans called the Gnostics, who the Romans exterminated. Why did they exterminate them? Because they were like a conduit, so to say. They were a linkage with the ancient spirituality of ancient Kemet, and the Romans were on the scene who were creating this white supremacy Christianity that's present with us today. They knew they could not create this Serapis Jesus with the Gnostics who were around at that time, because the Gnostics understood that the Christ, or the Ka, is the spirit. And once people rise up their Ka, their spirit, they will fight against tyranny and oppression. Well, this is what the Romans feared. They feared the people rising up fighting against tyranny and oppression. Okay, so they created what is called spiritual enslavement by putting an image up in front of us, okay, by putting the image of the enemy, okay, as the deity, as the God up in front of us, or as they say, God's son, okay, up in front of us. This is what we got trapped with. So we could never rise up our Ka, our Christ, okay, to fight against tyranny and oppression. When we see brothers and sisters shot down by the police force, if we understood what that Christ really means, okay, the birth of the black Christ. That's what I'm calling the black Christ. When people hear that, they say, okay, it's just a black version of Jesus. No. We're talking about a spiritual resurrection to rise up to fight against tyranny and oppression. That is the Ka. That is what our ancestors called. That's what they called the Sa-Ra, okay? This is where the Sa-Ra, the Son of God, this is what that means. It had nothing to do with any European Serapis Jesus. These concepts that we see, Sa-Ra, okay, that's the Medu Neter. They took that from the earliest and first language known to the world of the Medu Neter, the sacred language of God. This is where they call Son of God from. They took from the ancient Medu Neter, Septepen Ra. This is where they get God's chosen children. The Jews took that. Like vultures, they all came and took a piece of something of ancient Kemet. When we see in Revelations, Neb Kadu. What is that in Medu Neter? Neb Kadu, Lord, King of Kings. This is the importance, as peace be upon him, in the early 1800s. Even David Walker even told us we must return back to Egypt to study where our ancestors wrote in the books in stones for a liberation. That Egypt lays the foundation of liberation, as well as Martin Delaney Eakley, who told us that we must return back to Egypt. We got the evidence, we got the proof to show how they came and plagiarized many ideas. So people say, well, they stole the knowledge from Kemet. Yes, they stole it from Kemet. We are a stolen people. So if they steal us, the question, an intelligent question one got to ask, what else did you steal? So this is very important that we're going to be dealing with, and dealing with that black divinity and understanding how our ancestors brought this to the world. And unbeknownst to us, many times we speak ancient Kemetic names and don't even know it. Like, when, for instance, when we say our prayers, at the end of our prayers, Amen. So here, Amen, the Greeks took Amen up out of Africa. This is a jet black god that represented in the ancient city of Waset. The temples are still there that we take groups there annually every year, called Ipet Asut, dedicated to Amen, as well as the spiritual triad. What spiritual triad? The spiritual triad of Amen, Mut, and Khonsu. Long before there was a Rome that they called the Trinity and the Holy Family, that came from Amen, the jet black god that represented the invisible spirit in all of us, the invisible spirit that permeates throughout all the universe. But yet we see in Timothy, it talks about Amen representing the invisible spirit. So this is the importance of breaking the chains of spiritual enslavement and not getting into spookism that have blocked our minds of so many of our people. As every Sunday we see the churches are filled up, the preachers are there spitting out chitlin dribble juice from the pulpit annually every Sunday to our people, and demonizing and vilifying Egypt. And by doing this is why we can't see Egypt, and talking about God's chosen children, this and that, when that, in fact, was taken from Septepen Ra. So, of course, this time of the year, that's why it's so important to understand what this is all about, okay? So we can do a serious, not for people to believe it, but have a critical analytical analysis to think about it so we can see it. Because right now, this time of the year is about helping to pick up the gross national products and to start to worship this white baby, as well as the white female that they called Mary. And through the worship of this, which is white idolatry, we'll find ourselves in eternal slaves, which is the worst form of enslavement, and that is spiritual enslavement, as I'll say it again, when the enemy becomes the deity and the spiritual subconscious of our mind.
Part of protecting our ancestral lineage and heritage is to praise and honor our women. And there's a lot of there's a very strong energy today to push us to feel like women are the problem. Women don't do anything, or they don't deserve any respect when actuality.
We had defecation together, brother. We got just as much defecation. All of us got defecation on. We can't single out sisters and say they the problem. And here we got just as
Absolutely.
much white supremacy defecation on us as they do. We've been dipped in. We've been washed in this stuff together.
In truth, from what I've seen, the sisters, for the most part, keep society together. I mean, today you see men, and I'm not playing the divisive. I'm looking at what I see, what I've seen from my own personal experience, and I've seen that men, the nature of a man is to leave. If he's tired and he's done with it, his nature is to go into solace. He'll just go be to himself, which a lot of times has the woman have the children to be abandoned. Point being is that women are the fabric of our society. That's where I'm really going with this. Like, without women deciding, because they're the child bearers, to actually raise the children to health, our society would be nothing. And it's just a reminder that the tact of our African heritage comes in all different shapes and sizes, and we have to understand what it really takes to preserve it, because it's not often spoke about in our communities, and this is why we do the work to remind us.
And you're all doing a great job. And as I open up the program with the spirituality of the spiritual dialectical laws of opposites that our ancestors saw in the Ma'atian law, for there to be a god, it must be a goddess, and for there to be a goddess, it must be a god. And as I said, that Asar and Aset, who were created simultaneously. There was no, like we see the misogyny in Western world, there was nothing that Rhea was taken from Asar to make Aset. That's just sick misogyny that we see from the biblical account that was created by the patriarchs who came into Egypt. So this is why we still have a lot of this sick Western defecation on us, that we become misogynists ourselves sometimes because of the culture that we have lived in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's through that culture that we don't see that spiritual balance. We don't see how our ancestors saw it, that we are the spiritual personification of God and goddess on earth. And keep in mind that our ancestors could not conceive of a god without a goddess, all right, that we call the goddess Netert and the god Neter. Okay, that's the spiritual balance. I know some are saying, calling the sisters God. Okay, well, that's masculine. Okay, that's why the importance of studying Kemet to clearly understand what we're saying. All right, Kemet was based off of a balance. Okay, she would be the Netert. Okay, she would be the goddess. So that's the spiritual principle and foundation. So we understand that and see how even today that Africa is a matrilineal system. It's based off of a spiritual principle around the woman. As Dr. Ben, one of his most favorite things that he liked to show, peace be upon him, is the goddess Nut, where he would show in the tombs, okay, how long before we had any contact with any Western madness or before it was even in existence, here you see the goddess Nut stretched out over the tomb, a massive tomb, and here you see the goddess. Now, why would they have the universe represented as a goddess? From their empirical observation of Mother Nature, or even the cosmos, they saw the cosmos as a feminine principle. It gave birth to the S-U-N sun, like our mothers gave birth to the S-O-N sun. That's how we're here. They saw one as a micro womb and one as a macro womb. So when Pepi II of the 6th dynasty said the kingdom of heaven is between the legs of the goddess Nut, and for Dr. Ben, peace be upon him, he always brought clarity for us to understand it, that the kingdom of heaven is between the legs of the African woman, by understanding that her womb represents the micro-universe, okay, because in our ancestors saw in the spiritual dialectical laws of opposites that everything had its opposites, whether we're looking, as I said, masculine, feminine, large, small, okay, and on and on and on. You can't even conceive of nothing in the universe without an opposite. So the fact that we came from that micro-universe, this is what he was explaining in terms of when their minds would go somewhere else with it. But even though it rocked the church at the pulpit, it rocked the synagogue, and it rocked the mosque when he said it, but if they understood the spiritual principles that our ancestors were laying down in relationship to the goddess, they would have got a better clarity of it. So getting into December, that's so powerful because when we see a Set and the Holy Child Haru, and seeing how important that we see that even though Asar was cut up into 14 pieces, okay, and thrown throughout the land by the 72 conspirators and spread throughout the land, and a Set who had to go to the Happy Now, Happy as it was called, the Now, and would pray for her husband Asar's body to come back. So here we see the miraculous pieces coming together. But to make that analogy with us today, we see that we as an African people we were taken from Africa. We were cut up and spread throughout all over the world. So we have Africans who are in diaspora, who are in South America, who were stripped from the African continent, Africans in North America who were stripped from the African continent, Africans in Europe who were stripped from the African continent. So we were cut up and spread throughout the world. But it's the African woman that we see, even during the time of that Ma'afa, who had to make sure that we were fed the worst food, okay, for survival, okay, on the plantation. She, feeding us the chitlins, all right, in many cases, okay, even though the brother was out there in the field, but she was still had to sustain our survival, just like Set had to do. When we see that the evil brother Set, who was out to kill, okay, her son Haru, who he feared that he would grow up and avenge his father's death, okay, by him, meaning Set. But it's Aset, okay, who had to do everything to preserve the life, okay, and do everything to save the life of Haru. All right, so he would grow up. So when we make these parallels with our condition today of how we've been cut up, those are the same parallels that we see with ancient Kemet of how Asar was cut up. But it was the African goddess Aset, okay, who maintained the survival of Haru, that would maintain the nation and the throne, because all kings who preceded him, who were called the Haru throne, or the Haru Nesu, or meaning the Haru king on the throne. So this is the importance of understanding that whole goddess principle when we see everything that she had to go through. In fact, it is Tahuti, the letter Tahuti. Tahuti was represented as a zoomorphic form or animal form with the ibis bird, with a human body, okay? But it represented symbolism, not that they worshiped the ibis bird, but it represented science and intelligence and wisdom. In fact, it's Tahuti that wrote the earliest holy texts, okay, that we refer to as holy today, long before there were any Bibles. But it's also Tahuti that is the one who gave the call that a Set would have an immaculate conception, would have a virgin birth, okay? And in the spiritual realm, we relayed that to Asar, that his wife was going to have a holy birth, an immaculate conception. But when we look at it from the biblical account, Tahuti becomes Gabriel. Okay, we see that Gabriel, the angel of the Lord, appears in the back room to Mary, and she's shocked. He appears in the back room, full-grown man. And she says, "Who are you?" "I'm Gabriel, the angel of the Lord." "Well, why are you here?" "To let you know you're going to have a holy child." And then Mary's got to go to Joseph and tell Joseph that an angel of the Lord, a full-grown man, came and said that she's going to have a holy child, and that it's not going to be his child but God's seed, okay, or God's child. Now, Joseph had got to accept this angel of the Lord who comes. So with this angel of the Lord, who's Gabriel, which is a corruption, which is actually Tahuti, all right? That's who that is. They took that from ancient Kemet and the making a Western version of Christianity. And this is how we get that story, because when you parallel the story, it's the exact same story, where Tahuti will come to Aset and say she's going to have a holy birth. So again, this is the importance of breaking these stories down so our people will break the chains of this belief system of white supremacy Christianity that they've indoctrinated us with. But at the same time, showing the spiritual connection that our ancestors saw when they looked and saw the spirituality and the oneness of the masculine, the feminine, the God, and the goddess, and seeing that that is the Ma'atian law that our ancestors saw. Ma'at also is what? The cosmic goddess. So here we see that the law of the universe of truth, justice, and righteousness is represented as an African goddess. So this is the power that we see behind the spiritual feminine principle that our ancestors saw that we don't see in the Western world at all. Only thing we see is misogyny and hatred for the woman, their own women. So you know they have no respect for ours. So because we have lacked the knowledge of the African spirituality, then we become indoctrinated into their belief system. So in our subconscious mind, we play these things out. So we have misogyny, we have hatred to her with the Adam and Eve story, and the evils of the world is because Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So these are things that we have been locked into, okay, in the subconscious part of our mind when we start to deal with our own women, not from what our ancestors laid down, all right, only with the white supremacists, okay, scriptures, okay, those who wrote the scriptures, various Bibles and so forth, down to the millenniums. All that was corrupted from the papyruses that were taken from the greatest universities on the planet Earth, and many of these temples are still there, like Ipit-Asut and Ipit-Rasut and the Temple of Haru. These places are still there that we literally have now, I've taken hundreds of brothers and sisters back there over the years as I made my first journey with Dr. Ben. So this is the importance of revealing this information this time of the year, and so many spiritual ideas that we need to convey to our people to understand what this is really all about. And it's not going to take one lecture to do this, but at least for people who come out and start to think about it, because we're not asking people to believe nothing, but to have a critical analytical analysis to think. And that's what we've got to do. And those temples are there for future generations, okay, that are yet to come, okay, to show that this is the original holy land. This is the original sacred ground. Nothing like it on the planet Earth. You can't go nowhere else on the planet Earth and find great temples like this telling these stories that we see that ends up in Western version of religions today and practice throughout and their holidays. And that's even another thing when we get into that. You know, people get into the Santa Claus, and here you see the malls will fill up, and here we throw our babies up on a white guy's lap. And in Wisconsin, they have banned it because this is when all the pedophiles come out. And they start fondling the little children while they were sitting up there in their laps and everything. This is a sad thing. This is nothing but Saturnalia, as he was called in Rome, and Chris Kringles in Germany, as he was called. But in Rome, Saturnalia, also he's called Cronus, and the European Christian art of Cronus, he's eating his baby, and the blood is flowing down the baby. Now, what does that symbolize? Okay, when we look at that, because Cronus feared that his children were going to grow up and overtake his throne, so he ate his children. That's why you got the little elf attached to the candy cane, and you see that the head is bitten off. This is famous art by Europeans, by the way. All right, this is one of their famous art where Cronus is eating the baby and the blood flowing down. That's why the red is flowing down the candy cane. That represents Cronus eating his babies. That's what that symbolizes. The Germans' pine tree. That's another thing they got us into. Everybody, they're cutting down the pine trees. It gives us oxygen. And here we see the Germans brought that here to America in the late 1800s. It represents Thor. And Thor, by the way, is Thursday. But they bow down and worship that tree. And to keep that custom alive, that's part of Germanic tribes' custom. Here, to get your gift, you still got to bow down to Thor. You got to bow down and get the pine tree. But people say they go buy the Bible, but all they got to do is go to Jeremiah, where it talks about that this is the way of the heathen and the custom of the people, or to cut the tree out of the forest and deck it in silver and gold. I think it's in Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 2 and 6. So, again, these are part of Germanic tribes and so forth. So this is the importance of understanding these holidays and understanding African spirituality. I think we'll be able to save some money and not get caught up into the gross national products and trampling each other down at 4 o'clock in the morning as doors will open up. I mean, it's just mad insanity they got our people into, buying these trinkets and everything. I thought we had enough of the trinkets when coming here over here on the good ship Jesus, the Grace of God, and the Holy Mary, John Hopkins slave ships. Okay, the trinkets, okay, to trick us to get us over here. But these trinkets are still operating just as they operated in West Africa to trick us to get on those slave ships. I don't want to take up all the time talking. I give you time to maybe ask some questions about maybe what I said or something to it. I don't want
to. I heard.
Did I made it? Everybody's still there. Okay, that's good.
You're still here. I had the distinct opportunity of seeing your wife's presentation as well about the contributions of the sisters doing throughout our time, and a very amazing presentation. Very critical and very necessary because this overshadowing type of environment that we do live under really does put us in a situation of competition. You know, this capitalist rule where you would pit all three Africans in the family against one another. So it becomes a competition. You see, like even in our suffrage, we have a competition that's going on. Who has it the worst? As if we're not all suffering the same. And as if
insanity to even have it. Who has it the worst?
Right.
Even utter that. Who has it the worst?
Right.
You know.
I did want to add.
She shows in her lecture. You know, I mean, she definitely shows in her lecture, even though it's titled "Sisters in a Struggle: A Tribute to Black Women Liberators," but actually, it's showing brothers and sisters. It's showing the husbands, okay, with the sisters, okay?
Right.
And many of the famous brothers that we know, she's revealing a lot of the sisters that we don't know a lot about them, and showing how they work together for our liberation. And this is what we should be doing today, working together for our liberation, not trying to say who has it the worst. Okay, you don't find any Jews during the Holocaust say who got burnt the worst. Okay, the females or the males. Okay, who had the worst time on the Germans' death camps. This is why this is insanity to even utter such a thought. Who's got it the worst. This is another case of not wanting to a coward. When one becomes a coward, not looking at the enemy. Okay, this is our problem today. We're so busy desecrating each other's spirit, meaning our ka, calling each other names and everything else. We don't call the enemy any names. We don't call him kites and crackers and everything else. Okay, this is what was done on the plantation to make sure that we had no respect for each other's ka, each other's spirit. All right, so we end up calling ourselves all kind of low-life names that we still see today from that slave plantation experience and so forth, and calling the sisters all kind of low-life names, and brothers calling each other low-life names. All right, so a people cannot go through, as our ancestors called a kepara, a transformation. We've got to look to the future. If a people are not looking to the future and not at least trying to have a representation or display a representation of what we want to lay down for future generations and still keep the old slave plantation mentality, then we will find ourselves carrying a culture of slavery, as Carter G. Woodson said, and the miseducation of the Negro. If a people have no history, if they have no worthwhile tradition, it becomes a negative thought in the world that they stand and been exterminated. And this is how we've got to look at it. So every time we call another brother or sister names, okay, and so forth, even in the barbershop, I'm in a barbershop, hey, nigga, what's up? Okay, look, you killing your own spirit by calling another brother that. That's what you're doing. Right. You're killing your own spirit, because that's the culture of the plantation that we continue to pass down. All right, this is what we've got to understand. This is a war out here, a real war. And what we've got to start, what representation or what image, okay, should we start to set up for our people, for future generations to lay down? They are entertained by us calling each other's names, all right? They enjoy calling each other, seeing us call each other names, all right? So I don't care if it's the short version or long version. They love it. White folks love it because they know that we're still caught in that slave mentality. And this is the importance of understanding the war that we're really up against and the war that we're laying down. So when a brother and sister start to respect each other's ka, okay, their African ka, the African spirit, all right, then we don't see the death and destruction, okay, because a brother starts to realize that he's looking at himself, and another sister is looking at herself when she looks at another sister. We're looking at each other. Once we understand that, so we have to understand that what we're dealing with and the respect that we have to lay down. I know back in the time I was not always on the same spirit that I'm on. Okay, when I grew up on the block and everything, I said words and things, but I knew that this knowledge for me, I respect African spirituality, I respect African history because it made a transformation in my life. It showed me who I really am, okay, that we all have. It's just lying dormant, all right, in many cases, okay, and it takes that spark, okay, of someone coming, okay, to unlock who you really are. For me, it was Dr. Ben. All right, okay, I've taught 14 years with him, okay, on his side, working with him, doing the field research, traveling up into Sudan and the highlands of Ethiopia, many times back to Kemet and being an apprentice under him. This is what it's really all about. That's when I realized who I really was. So, of course, I could never say the things to another brother that I used to say because I understand, okay, that I'm killing my own spirit to do that. And this is the importance, or even calling us sisters names and so forth. So again, when we stay in this degradation, and not realize that the most powerful symbol that our ancestors used was the scarab beetle. Why did they use the scarab beetle? Because it symbolizes the kepara, transformation. That's what it's all about. Everything's transforms. The slave doesn't transform. A slave doesn't know how to transform. All right, because a slave is trapped in degradation. A slave is trapped in the defecation of his enslavement. Okay, so he can't transform. To transform, you've got to have a spiritual consciousness of our people, a spiritual consciousness of our black divinity. This is what creates the transformation, and that's where the African genius comes out. That's what a brother who may be walking around, a crackhead or whatever, not realizing that he's a genius, but he's locked up in the present slavery today. And this is the importance. And by having presentations like this, as I've seen what they have done, okay, where it has released that genius and opened the brothers' and sisters' minds and spirit up, where they can never go back into white idolatry. And once they stop the white idolatry, that's when their spirituality starts to open up. And that's when they lock into who their true genius really is. And so that's the purpose and the objective of doing this presentation this time of the year, all right, to do what it's supposed to do at this time of the year, to go through that kames, to go through that spiritual birth, okay? As the Son is born on December the 25th, we are personified as that spiritual energy to the rebirth of our spirit, the rebirth of the energy of who we are. This is the spiritual science that our ancestors were laying down. And these are some of the things that we're going to deal with. We're going to show how they had these ecumenical conferences that they created that created this white idolatry on us, that created the whole idea of this Serapis Jesus at the Conference of Nicene in 325 AD. Okay, we're going to show how they did these things. Religious gangsters came together and put these things together. God had nothing to do with this. We're not talking about no man, some human figure up in the heavens looking down on us. This is a man-made type of thing. Our ancestors understood that divine force of the universe, who they had Ptah, monotheism, one God, jet black, in a human image, as well as Amen in the Middle Kingdom, is a human image. But that doesn't mean that Amen look like a human form. It only means is now that they're starting to unlock today, as physicists are starting to understand there's something all around us called dark matter or dark energy. It's all around us. It's in us. It permeates all the universe. It holds the planets together. It holds galaxies together. It's everything. That's where our ancestors anthropomorphized it in a human form for us to understand, okay, this divine energy, okay, that they called Amen, that we say God today. Jet black. That's what it represented. They took the heavens to represent a goddess because the heavens, and it represents a macro womb. They used a human form for us to understand it. They used Shu in a human form for us to understand it, but they understood that air is not in a human form. But for us to understand it, they took the earth to represent Geb in a human form for us to understand it. So this divine energy in the universe that we call God today, it has no human representation to it. The concept of God is beyond our human comprehension. But it's a force that's all around us that our ancestors, who were the first to anthropomorphize it in human form for us to understand it.
I say. Hey, brother Knowledge, do we have anybody on the line trying to speak to us, ask any questions?
About to go to the phone lines right now. This is a unique opportunity, family. 515-605-9360. Again, 515-605-9360. And press 1 with your questions or your comments. I believe the brother Akbar is in the building, so I'm going to bring him in right now.
Yes, how you doing?
Brother Akbar, how you doing, brother?
Hotel, how you doing,
brother?
All right, warrior.
Yeah.
With dissemination information for liberation.
I messed around and was taking me a little nap and overnapped. So I'm getting a little late into the show, and I'm glad that you came in and using this vehicle to let the people know about what we have going on here in Detroit. Trying to get the knowledge out to our people. And I also want to thank my partner, Brother Cujo, for setting this up with this brother and the brother show. Excuse me, brother, for not, knowing your name and everything, because I'm a little fogged up right now. But thank you for letting us use this vehicle to promote Ashra Kwesi and his knowledge to our people and our event that we're having here in Detroit.
Well, it's definitely an honor and a privilege to be able to share discourse with such a great example by African genius. So, y'all know y'all always welcome. Anything that y'all have, y'all need to promote, anything y'all got going on, Kojo, we go back. So, the invitation is extended to you as well, Brother Akbar. So whatever y'all got coming up, however we can support y'all, help y'all, most definitely.
Yes, we gotta keep the communiversity open, as Ashra Kwesi calls it, the communiversity, because that was the first place that the scholars, Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark, and even before them, they get down at the Schomburg with Arthur Schomburg teaching them, and George Jackson, and I mean we have a whole line of scholars that passed on this knowledge, and we got to keep the baton going and the torch burning, and hopefully we can wake our people up.
That's right.
Y'all doing the right thing, my brother. Having these communiversities, peace be upon him, as Bobby Wright is the one that actually coined that term, who wrote Psychopathic Racial Personality. He's the one that called it the communiversity. So yours is a communiversity radio show, my brother, and Brother Kojo and Akbar, who equally respecting the information that my wife and I bring forward, setting up the communiversity to educate the community. As I said, this is the epitome of white supremacy right now. This is the time that they have now sedated our people into the white idolatry right now, and they're worshiping all this white images are now going to be all over the media and Christmas cards and images. This is the worst form of enslavement now, which is a spiritual enslavement.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to speak to the ritual, speak to some of the rituals too. Like the election just happened, and they say we had Halloween, and we got this celebration.
Halloween. Samhain. We dealt with that. In fact, I was on Carl Nelson's show, WOL, talking about Halloween, and again, that's another one that have indoctrinated our mind. All of these holidays, they've got us trapped into and got us sitting down celebrating in Columbus, who was one of the a ruthless killer, and genocide of people that set in motion the kidnapping of our people, from the African continent, and creating the whole, capitalist system, off of the backs of our ancestors. And now here you got Halloween, another one that the Europeans, the Irish brought that over here from Ireland, where they actually worship this evil, demonic character, a satanic character called Samhain, who rose on the 31st, when all it was the night of the living dead, when all the dead rose from the graves, and to represent Samhain, you had to put or show that you were with Samhain, you had to put a jack-o'-lantern in your window. So when all the evil was walking around, and being a part of this, and especially the Wiccas or witches who were burned at the stake. And a Wicca could be anyone. It could be a female who's a prostitute or a witch. So they burned them at the stake, especially when they saw children going to the trick's house, to get his treats from the Wiccas, the witches. So they were burned at the stake. So, but the time of the Night of the Living Dead on October the 31st, they would raise up out the grave. And this is the time the Wiccas get their revenge. And this is a time when they also went to the house at night, and the men thought that they were prostitutes. They could be either prostitutes or lesbians, and they literally cut off their penis. So they got tricked. And so, because here the trick thought he was getting a treat, but he got tricked, and he got his penis cut off. That's the phallic symbol of the witch. That you see her riding that. That's why the black widow spider is prevalent, because of it kills the male, once they finish mating. So again, you see all these symbols all around part of the Halloween holiday, and here you go into another Thanksgiving holiday where they're after killing off many of the indigenous people of this land that they refer to as so-called Indians by putting syphilis and smallpox on their blankets and killing them off. In fact, when the Pilgrims, nothing pure about them, came over here, and where many of the indigenous people started to feed them from the harsh winter that they were going through, Then after that, here we see they start cutting off their heads and putting the Indians' heads and putting it on poles. So that became the symbol for the Indians' head was the turkey with the feathers on it and so forth. So I mean, this is the horror and the hell. And then and all of them were about picking up the gross national product. And then of course the big one is Christmas. That helps really pick up the gross national product that we've spent an hour talking about in the last hour. But at least from the Kemetic side and the spirituality that was literally plagiarized from the temples and tombs, and that's what I'm going to be revealing. Okay, showing the books in stone. Okay, it's been there 3,000 and 4,000 years. To show where they literally copied these ideas that nobody can deny it. Once we do the comparative analysis, and you can see it for yourself. And so that's the importance of having this presentation at this time of the year to break the whole bondage of this white idolatry that many of our people are locked into.
I would like to ask you a question, Brother Ashra. Like the Dutch Santa Claus, Sinterklaas, or whatever they call them, and then the black slave or the elf he got with him, Zwarty Pete.
Black Pete.
How does that line up with our, in Christianity? I mean, Santa Claus over here, and why did these ones become white elves and the other ones over there is black?
Well, as I said before, as I know you mentioned it, you got in a little late. I talked about how many of the stories, the Kemetic stories, and how the Greeks and the Romans who came in and corrupted these stories, and through the corruption of these stories, literally turned them white, as I talked about Tahuti and Mary, and how that became Gabriel and Set, who was the first prototype of the Madonna and child, and her holy child Haru now becomes Mary, and the Serapis Jesus, and so on. But when we look at the elk, the closest association that we can associate with this elk, would be Beth. Beth we can see at the temple of Heru that I talked about earlier, where Haru was born in a chapel in a holy birth. That even in the but the Egyptian Torah books, they still have it in there that this is where the origin of the Christianity idea came from, of the child born in the holy chapel. And that's right in their Torah book. But in any case, we see that Beth represented that holy chapel. It was called the Memezi house, or the birth house. So on top of the birth house and the Memezi house, you have the little Twa, who the Europeans call the derogatory name pygmies. Okay, the Twa was always respected in Kemet because they represented the first people. So when we see that when the Greeks and Romans came in, the idea of Beth was adopted, and plagiarized and carried into Rome, that became the little dwarfs, that became the little elves and so forth. As I talked about Cronus earlier, now in the symbolism of Cronus, when we see the symbols of the candy cane, and that is all symbolized as Cronus eating his babies because he feared that his children would overtake his throne once he grew up. So the Europeans' favorite art is him biting off the head, and the blood is flowing down the baby. When you look at that and see the elf next to the candy cane, that's the blood flowing down the candy cane from when Cronus ate his babies. Now, there were other forms of this Santa Claus that was called Saturnalia, in Rome. Saturnalia, who the idea, some say that the term capitalist, came from Saturnalia. Because of the money that he collected during this time of the year. That's where the whole name capitalist system came out of. Another name that we see is associated with this character, this fat, jolly guy, is called Kris Kringles in Germany. So it's part of the German custom. So once we go and do the background, do the research, all the Europeans brought something to America, as I said, like the pine tree. The Germans worship that tree. So they brought it to America. And the Germans are the ones that started to spread as a pine tree because it represented Thor. And that's where the name Thursday is named after. So Wednesday was Woden, Thursday's Thor, the sun, and the mother is Freya. That's what Friday's named after. Saturday is Saturnalia, that I said earlier. So they still deify these, the real pagan, if they want to call pagan, these are the real pagan images that the Europeans still practice in their faith and their holiday. I mean, here you got Christmas, supposed to be the birth of this Serapis Jesus, which is truly what it is. At the same time, you got this Santa Claus character running around, totally confusing the children. So which one are they going to accept? The one that's going to get gifts and toys, okay, or this other Jesus that they're now saying is the holy birth and all these other things? Because they've incorporated it all in the major holidays, whether that's Easter, okay, whether we get the Easter and the bunny and the rabbits and the eggs, because a rabbit doesn't lay eggs, okay. Again, so you got to ask, why are these eggs in the basket and a rabbit and a chocolate rabbit? Because, again, that goes back to Greek Orpheus, where the men who looked at spring and the resurrection of the sun, they thought that how the nature came back and the fertile land came back and the fertility of the earth came back is because the Greek males and the fornication. They would have all this fornication and sex. Okay, first the white Greek female would go run and paint herself and run and hide. Then the Greek male would have to go look for her. And then once he found her, they would have a lot of sex. That's why you get the Easter egg hunt. And you paint the white egg that represents the Greek female. And then you go on the Easter egg hunt, when actually it was an Easter leg hunt that goes back to Greece. So again, when we look at these things and see that the eggs in the basket and the color eggs and the rabbit, because the males would have to bring rabbits with them, and they would have all this fornication until the rabbits would have their litter. So that's why you see the symbolism around the resurrection of Easter associated with the resurrection of the Serapis Jesus, which is a corruption that was taken from Kemet, because our ancestors saw that as the resurrection of the sun during the spring equinoxes. So again, but because of the indoctrination, okay, we've only been out of slavery, okay, physical slavery anyway, 150 years. So we are still in a slave culture, mentally, psychologically, all right, in some cases physically, all right, when we feel that we can't really go anywhere because we feel out of a slave culture on a plantation, we feel that outside of our neighborhood something might happen to us, so we still psychologically suffer from these same types of things. But above all, we don't like to break these things because of the festivities of these holidays. Like, what child can you tell them not to celebrate Easter when they're getting chocolate eggs and a chocolate rabbit, and it's always a chocolate rabbit because a chocolate represents sex, just like a rabbit, because of the proliferation of the rabbits. And so the Playboy bunny and the Easter bunny, they're one and the same thing. It's the same bunny. It represents sex. So how can you tell a child the joy of chocolate eggs and a chocolate rabbit and all these things? Okay, it's hard to break this away from our people. How can we tell them about Christmas and maxing out their credit cards and buying all these gifts and being brainwashed to storm the stores at 4 o'clock in the morning during Black Friday? So this is the importance of having these communiversities, all right, that I'm a part of the communiversity. I grew up in communiversities. So we don't have these communiversities to educate our people. This is when we fall deeper and deeper into mental and psychological and spiritual enslavement. Just like on the plantation, we didn't teach each other how to read on Master's porch. We had to go out to the bush. So again, we're not coming with this lecture with a European sitting up there in the classroom, okay, monitoring what we say. We're not coming to a white church with a white preacher monitoring what we can say and can't say. So we're totally in control of the information. We're coming with documentation. It goes back thousands of years. It was here thousands of years before I was here, and it'll be thousands of years here long after I'm gone. And the books in stone, our ancestors wrote the first language of the Middle Nature as though they knew that one day we would forget our story. But it's now up to us to open our minds up and see how that not only were we stolen, but the sacred knowledge of our ancestors was stolen and corrupted and turned into white idolatry, where the enemy became the deity and the spiritual subconscious of our mind.
I have one more question. Are you aware of any symbolic correlation between Santa Claus, the Pope, and the Pharaoh all having a crook?
Well, first of all, I don't like to connect them in that sense, okay, because it's giving validity to the Pope and the Santa Claus when in fact this is thievery. All right, the Pope stole the idea of the Heka. That's what it's called in the Kemetic name, the Heka, okay, from the Nesu, that would be the king of ancient Kemet. So when you look at the Heka, you're looking at an ancient African symbol that represents the ruler, okay? Asar generally holds the Heka in the spiritual realm, showing that he's the ruler of life in the spiritual realm for the spiritual resurrection. And then there's another one called the Neheka. Okay, you got the Heka and the Heka. It's called the crooks and the flail. And when we get the idea in songs, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Okay, thy crooks and thy flail, okay, is over my body. This is where that came from. Okay, that came from. So when we see the Pope and we see the Santa Claus, again, we see the thievery, the corruption from our ancestors, okay, that was taken from ancient Kemet. The one in ancient Kemet goes back thousands of years. When you see the king holding that Heka, that's thousands of years old. There was no Santa Claus yet. There was no white Serapis Jesus yet. Did not exist yet. That is outright thievery from what our ancestors had that you'll see. And in fact, I show, these are some of the things that I even show in the lecture, some of those types of parallels of the Heka and the Neheka.
Yes, because I've noticed that, the symbol of resurrection is X. They call Christmas Xmas, and Santa Claus has a candy cane that's a crook. Right.
Well, yes, so we had talked about the Christmas earlier, Brother Akbar. It's a Kemetic word called, and we're repeating some of the things. It's a Kemetic word that our ancestors are called Kames. Kames is the ancient Medu Neter glyph with two arms up. It represents spirit, okay? And Mes meant birth. So it was the spiritual birth. It was the Kames Haru. It was the spirit birth of Haru at December the 25th. Why December the 25th? Because the sun is born out of the death of winter precisely at that time, at December the 25th. So we're seeing the Kames Haru. That's the spiritual birth of Haru that became Christmas, that was taken from the Kames. All right, and I show that in the Medu Neter. So when we see the Kames Haru, this is where that was taken from, as well as other ideas that we talked about, as we talked about Sarah, the Son of God. Okay, that was taken from Sarah. You see it on the temple. That was thousands of years before a Western version of Christianity was even in existence. How the Europeans got a lot of this knowledge is based off of when the Greeks and Romans came in, especially with the Ptolemies who came in after Alexander. And they, right there in Alexandria, where they built a library there called the Alexandria Library. When Alexander got Aristotle to plunder the temples of Egypt and the papyruses, okay, thousands of them they took out of the temple of Ipit-Rasut, the temple of Haru, okay, the temple of Aset, and many other temples up and down the Nile, the temple of Menefer, the temple of Anu. This is where they housed all that knowledge in the Alexandria Library, and they started to study. We've got to keep in mind that the Ptolemies were there for 300 years in Kemet, 300 years. Okay, not to mention the fact that when the Romans came in, they had 400 years, and not to mention the Byzantine Roman Christians when they came in. So we're talking about 1,000 years, okay, collectively together, that these Europeans had time to study the ancient African spirituality that we see that's now being corrupted into white idolatry that we see it today. And it's only until we go back and not get into spookism as they have now vilified and demonized ancient Kemet, as they call Egypt today, for us to stay away from the sacred knowledge. And this is the reason why we can't look at it. But when we look at these Bibles and so forth, okay, the Old Testament, New Testament, and even the Quran, and even the Veda Veda, okay, of India, all of that is based off of the ancient African Shishada mystery system and the sacred knowledge of Kemet that many came in and copied these spiritual ideas.
Pardon me, family. I've been told we got some callers on the line that want to come in and have some questions and comments.
Okay, sure.
About Kwesi.
Okay, sure, brother.
Hey, Brother Knowledge,
all right,
there?
family, we're going to go to the phone lines now, so everybody who had a question or comment, again, that phone number to call in is 515-605-9360.
we are over the time that we agreed for Baba Kwesi to come on, so we're asking the family to be concise with their question or comment, because we are very respectful of his time. We appreciate the time him and Brother Kojo and Brother Akbar have dedicated thus far, so please be concise with your question or your comment. Remember the area code 832-845, 832-845. Please state your name, where you call it from, and whether you have a question or a comment.
Yes, I was hoping that y'all would stop talking so I could get this question in. I'm not even going to say my name, because the question that I have for him, I started my journey about 10 years ago. I ran across Anthony T. Browder's book in a flea market and picked it up and read it, and I've been in love with Kemet and the Neteru ever since. My question is, the problem with the goddess is that there is a deep corruption going on right now in the black community with this concept, okay? I have an excerpt that I want to read real briefly to you from the Great Cosmic Mother. It says, indeed, the further back one goes in time, the more bisexual or grandiose is the Great Mother. As Charlotte Wolfe says in Love Between Women, perhaps the present-day lesbian woman is the closest in character to ancient women, with their fierce insistence on strength, independence, and integrity of consciousness. The problem that I'm seeing in the conscious community with the goddess concept is that they're using it as a catalyst to promote homosexuality among women and to promote a kind of a low-level hatred of men using the goddess concept. I don't even like to use that concept no more, because they attribute the most disgusting, filthy sexual practices to the goddess. And they say it and they do it in the name of Aset, and they do it in the name of Mayat, and they do it in all these goddesses' names, and then say that they are right and exact. And I don't like it. And I think it's disgusting.
Sister, the desecration of ancient African spirituality is not only in the goddess, but in everything that Europeans have put his hands on. In fact, the hour and a half that I've been talking about the whole desecration, these are white lesbian females, okay, and white feminist movements, okay, who are using ancient African spiritual principles to promote their whole decadent way of life, and using the African goddess to do it. So because they, like I said before, because, everything that we look at, I don't care what it is, in ancient African spirituality, they have corrupted it. And above all, as I said before, the African Ka, the African spirit, you have the Holy Child, the Holy Mother, okay, they have made into a white female. So reading these white female lesbians who have corrupted the book, the goddess, that should not make us stay away from the sacred knowledge, because some white lesbian, a homosexual can pick up something on a sar, because our ancestors used the phalanx, which is a symbol to represent a sar's resurrection, because our ancestors looked at Matnechet, the Kemetic word for Mother Nature. And there they saw that the natural thing that men do in the morning is that we have an erect penis right before sunrise, all right? So here you got these little white fags running around here talking about, okay, the penis of a sar, okay, and now trying to use that for their sexuality and phallic worship, all right? So the same thing with the white females, the same thing. I mean, we live in a decadent Western world, my sister, all right? So anything that they get their hands on in terms of related to Africa, this is what we're going to see. They're going to totally destroy it or try to destroy it. This is what we see out here. So, again, if you don't like to say goddess, then use the Kemetic word, Netert. Okay? Use the Kemetic word, the Netert and the Neter. That's the spiritual balance, the spiritual opposite. So you don't have to use goddess, okay? And then they probably won't even know what you're talking about, because they probably don't even know the Kemetic word for the goddess.
The only thing I want to add to that is it's our job to protect it. It's our job to know the sciences.
So this is what you're doing now, Brother Kojo and Brother Akbar, okay, by having these communiversities, okay, and lectures, and having on our brother with the radio program, okay, the Blog Talk Radio. Okay, this is what this is all about. So we can start to disseminate information to think, as our sister just called in, okay, and which is a very serious part that she mentioned there to show how these Europeans, all right, okay, we look at the Western version of Christianity is nothing but a total corruption of the African story of Asar, Aset, and Haru. Totally desecrated. Totally desecrated.
Brother Kwesi, isn't the whole Catholic thing about worshiping the phallics, the penis worship in St. Peter's Square and all that?
It goes back even before then. It goes back all the way to the Greeks who didn't understand it. The Greeks who were the first who came in, and then the Romans. Okay, they took it literally. In fact, they didn't understand the whole sahu, the ka sahu. The Kemetic word for ka sahu is the spiritual body. Okay, they took the kat, which is the physical body, would rise up to the grave. Now, this is the same morbid teaching as part of the Western version of Christianity to this very day, that when you're buried, your physical body will be buried, and one day there'll be a night of the living dead that you'll get up out that grave and go to heaven, provided that you did good. Is that correct? Your physical, it had nothing to do with the physical body. The Europeans, they didn't understand spiritual things that you could not see. So when we use the phallics of Asar, it was a symbol when you see him in the Setsu, the Kemetic word for resurrection. He's rising up, but for us to clearly understand it, now again, they're not looking at it from a pornography, all right? They're not looking at it from a sexual thing. That's how the Europeans didn't understand. But they showed the penis with the sun above his penis, clearly saying that right before sunrise, this is the spiritual resurrection. And then they put the scarab beetle right above the sun. Why the scarab beetle? Because it represents Keparah, transformation. He's transforming from a physical body to a spiritual body called the Ka Sahu. Then you see the X on his body. Why the X? Because when you look up in the sky, okay, at high noon and see the sun, you see it's flaring out in an X. So here we see that the power of the resurrection is at high noon. So that becomes the Tekanu that you see in front of the temples. That becomes the steeple of the church. Okay? When you look at even the Greek churches, it even looks like a phallix because it's round on the top like a penis.
Hey, Baba,
but the Greeks took it literally. Hold up for a second. The Greeks took it literally. They took it as an actual phallic worship. They didn't understand the spiritual representation of that goes on to this very day. Okay, I think someone wanted to ask a question.
I was checking to see if we had anybody else on the line, the one that asked the question.
Well, we do have some other callers.
So everything, we can't look at it from one perspective. We just can't look at the goddess. Okay, every aspect of ancient Kemet has been desecrated. Okay, if you go to a glyph that I just put up, it's called Ashra Kwesi speaks on the Rosetta Stone and the Medu Neter and the plunder of Egypt, and I'm showing them hacking out the Medu Neter. People are debating whether the Medu Neter has been deciphered or not. All right, okay, there's some of the Medu Neter has been deciphered and some of it has not been deciphered because there was an esoteric interpretation, but we should be coming together trying to save the Medu Neter from the plunder. Back in our time, Dr. Ben and others, we came together to fight these white supremacist Egyptologists. We weren't coming together calling each other names and desecrating every damn thing, okay, and coming out fighting with each other and then bring out stuff about the Medu Neter when they're over there tearing up the temples.
Yeah, it sure is a lot of low-level so-called scholars out here fussing and fighting and desecrating the work.
Because of that new technology called the internet, okay, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, okay, all this stuff that they have created now. That Morgan Freeman, who did a show and said that what the social network and the YouTubes and all this stuff is doing is creating the chemical called dopamine in the brain. And dopamine acts just like cocaine, okay, in the brain. So when we get on there and start doing all this stuff, on the YouTube and everything, and the narcissism and the egomania and all that stuff, that's what it's doing. It's causing the dopamine, okay, chemical in the brain, just like cocaine would do. So you see brothers on there look like they're on drugs because they are on drugs. It's just releasing the same thing as cocaine would do.
And some of them be foaming from the mouth and everything in some of them videos.
Yeah, doing the same thing. This is part of their transhumanism.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is crazy.
I'm sorry, you said you had another question? There was another question on the line.
There was another caller.
Yeah, we're going to go to the phone lines and get these callers in so we can continue on. We're going to go to area code 313-570. 313-570.
Peace, family.
Peace.
What's up?
I don't know if y'all can hear me. Peace, family. It's BNC.
We can hear you, my
Detroit.
brother.
Okay, good. Appreciate all your work, Baba Kwesi, everybody on the call. Very proud of you, brother.
Peace, brother B.
Asante Sana, my brother. Many thanks.
Yeah, very proud of you. Baba Kwesi, saw you when Kojo brought you to Detroit. Really honored. Looking forward to getting on one of your trips real soon. My question, to be brief, you were talking about the days of the week. They were kind of hinted at how Thursday was about Thor and how all these days.
I don't know what happened to your voice, brother, but you kind of switched. I can hardly hear you now.
Okay, my bad about that. Can you hear me better now?
A little bit, yes, sir.
Okay, you were talking about how the days of the week, as we know them, are related to these other religious figures like Thor and all these other mythologies. That kind of, there was an agreement to put all of these days together to bring the people together. And I wanted to know, to me, that this is very colonizing to continue to refer to the days that way. And I wanted to know, what are your recommendations for taking us out of that frame of mind and putting us in a more spiritual connotation to these terms that we're using for the days of the week?
Well, I think what we're doing right now, we're educating the community. Any format that we can have at our disposal to start to educate the people, whether that be the radio programs or whether that with Kojo, Brother Akbar, having the community in Detroit, on December 3rd. This is all about educating the people. This is the format that we have. Just like on the plantation, we didn't do it on Massa's porch. All right, that's why that social media is something else. But we go out to the bush and teach each other how to read, and we come out. Okay, we know how to read. We know how to operate collectively together. So this is what we have to do. So when we look at these and hear this for the first time about some of the information, then hopefully that's an inspiration for our brothers and sisters to start to research for themselves equally, because as I said earlier, the purpose and the objective ultimately of all of this is to open up our ancestral genetic memory bank and find out what our genius is, all right, within this space and time, that we can equally have that which is lying dormant in us to offer on the table with that piece of that mirror that I talked about earlier that was broken up. We all have a piece. Ashra Kwesi doesn't have all the pieces. Okay, I just have a small piece that years ago that helped when Dr. Ben, peace be upon him, helped me open up my ancestral genetic memory bank. So we all have it. So when you look at these European holidays and the colonization process that's taking place, they colonized our mind, as Dr. Clark said. Okay, they colonized the image of God. So through that colonization, they brought their culture. So whether we're looking at Monday for Moon's Day, a Germanic tribes, or Tua for Tuesday, okay, another Germanic goddess, as they call it, okay, Wednesday for Woden, okay, Thursday for Thor, Friday for Freya, Saturday Saturnalia. Then you got Sunday. This is all dealing with their culture. The months, the months, okay, Augustus Caesar for August, July for Julius Caesar, September for Septicus Severus, October for Octavian, another name for Augustus Caesar, on and on and on. They have indoctrinated us thoroughly into their names and everything. This is the colonization of the culture, the colonization of our mind to indoctrinate us thoroughly into a whole European way of life and way of thinking. And this is all we know. So he who circumscribes your circumference, okay, determines the diameter of your thinking. So our thinking is locked within that diameter. That's what made us slave. because the slave didn't know anything else to think outside of that diameter once they circumscribed that circumference. So what we're doing is breaking the gravitational pull of this European thought and this European Western world. People talking about they don't want to go to hell. They don't have to worry about that. Look at the Hellenistic culture. We've been in hell for 2,000 years. This is where we have been. So we're breaking that whole Hellenistic, European, mental state. And that above all starts with, the most critical time, and that is the time of their holidays and the Christmas and all these things. And so that's why we applaud and give high recognition to people like Brother Akbar and Kojo who take it upon themselves and have the Murray, the Kemetic word for love, to do something like this, for the people. There are many brothers and sisters out there that got economic resources and don't care at all right? And here they have the Murray to take their little resources they have to make this happen and to help bring in, to educate, to liberate our people, and there'll be many there. As we've seen in previous presentations, these kind of presentations help many people. And that's why I said, we need many lifetimes. This will never happen well within my lifetime, and I will never reach 1% of the people in my lifetime. So that's why it's critical, to have these kind of programs. It helps us think outside of the matrix of white supremacy.
I like to field that question real briefly and say one mistake I've made early on in some of my work was trying to get, say, the third base while still on first, and not going through second base. And what I mean by that is even with the days of the week, even with our number systems, our English language, there's certain things that just come with what we have with our matrix. And until we educate enough people to start creating something different or going back to what we had and learn these different native tongues, we really got to work with what we have and make sure that we stay focused on what's going to give us the greatest change without without extra effort. Things like again, just educating people, things like having neighbors and having people to come together and talking about important things again. Because in my opinion, we can change the names to anything any day of the week, but if we're still dealing with the same issues, then I would rather us focus on what's going to give us a different shift of consciousness, and getting the days of the week change is a great thing. It's just it takes a lot more. It takes a lot extra things to happen before we get to that.
You're right, my brother. But in education, it's like going into a classroom. Okay, you go into a classroom and you learn the fundamentals of reading. Okay.
Right.
Well, you may learn basically about fundamentals of reading, but there's other aspects to education as well. So in terms of that question was brought up about the holidays, about a brother when he asked that question because he mentioned it. But see, what that does, you got to understand what that does is not the fact that he may not want to change the holidays, but the fact that I have evoked the consciousness of what those days mean. Okay, so when you evoke somebody's consciousness, it does what? It makes people start thinking. And above all, they start thinking about other things that they've been led to believe and never gave it any thought. How many people give any thought to the day, what the days of the week are and what the days of the mean or the months mean? But see, so it's not necessary of changing it, but the fact that you have a mental thought now that what this is. It's just like this communiversity that we're having. All right, most people celebrate the Christmas holiday as it is, okay, as we see it. But now we come to bring the mental thought, okay, because you got to get people to think. Okay, so once people start to have critical thinking, they can start to have critical analytical analysis about things. So that's the key thing, is to think, is to start thinking. And then if one chooses to use Kemetic names for different things, okay, then that's fine. That's great. That's thinking outside the matrix of all these things. But as I tell all people, I don't come to do these lectures for people to believe in what I'm saying. Okay. I come for people to think, okay? I do the comparative analysis, so the brain is going to do what it's supposed to do anyway, is to think, and to show that, above all, that this was taken from our black divinity. This was taken from our black spirituality, all right? And then we won't get caught up in it so much, okay? We won't get caught up into the madness so much. Why is the reason why our brothers and sisters are out there trampling down each other on Black Friday if they had any knowledge about themselves, they would definitely sit that out. But the reason is because they have no idea what they're doing. It's like animals, okay? When the lion knows it can run the buffalo, one of the biggest animals on the African plain, okay, the water buffalo. When he knows he can run him, all right, then he got him on the run. He can make his pick, all right? He's in a stampede. But once the water buffalo is conscious and becomes organized, he can kill the lion. He starts to understand that it's just a few lions and many of them, and they can circle up and they can stop this madness. But as long as they're caught up in the madness and caught up in the hysteria of the trampede, then they'll never know what's going on. So these are all, I think that any aspect of white supremacy culture and Western civilization that we start to hack at the doors of the real reality of what it is, all of it is important, every last bit of it, okay? Because if one is caught up in it, okay, and saying things, okay, that in some cases in the English language that may be desecrating ourselves, okay? Like I said earlier, what does the culture do when we're still slaves a day, desecrating our African ka, when we're calling each other names and so forth, back and forth, back and forth? How is the African spirit going to grow? It's just like a mother, who would take and call their child negative names. Okay, what kind of self-esteem is going to come up out of that child? As I heard the mother the other day tell the child, come here, you little black nappy-headed so-and-so. Okay, what kind of child is that going to grow up to be, the self-esteem of that child? So the same thing when another brother does what he did on the plantation, okay, and calls, a little low-life name to each other, as we do in the barber shop, as is part of the culture while white folks are being entertained, these things have got to be checked. They got to, you got to understand what this is all about. It's the perpetuation of the slave culture. And if there's anything that we can do to expose their culture, every dot, T that can be exposed to what it is, we got to do it.
That's right. Hey, Brother Knowledge, we have one last call before we hit the 9 o'clock hour.
Peace.
Black Outstanding Radio.
Yes, I want to say peace to the God Knowledge Born and Hotep to the great Baba Kwesi.
Hotep, my brother, how you feeling?
I'm doing well, sir. It's a
Sound
pleasure
like a warrior's voice to me, brother.
Yes, sir. And it's a pleasure to be speaking to someone who's spread so much enlightenment with their deep well of knowledge. I did have one question I wanted to ask. I know that time is of the essence, but I hope you didn't already answer this before I got on the line an hour ago.
We'll just say it again. Okay, repetition for education.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I would like for you to answer if we speak of Mayat and the principles of Mayat and the spirituality of ancient Kemet, but would you say that pretty much all African spirituality is the same principle, maybe just with different characters or different manifestations? And if so, why or why not?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the same spiritual principles. If we look at the Yoruba culture in West Africa, and we look at the Orishas, okay, of the Yoruba culture, and we study the Orishas and we study the Netarus, we're looking at the same spiritual principles. The names are just different. When we go throughout the African continent, keep in mind that Kemet came about not because of its own. It came about because of the Great Lakes region. And Dr. Ben, peace be upon him, and his favorite quote that I like to quote all the time from the Papyrus of Hunefer, that we came from the beginning of the Nile, where God happy dwelt at the foot of the mountain of the moon. That being Kilimanjaro and Rwenzori, that I've been at both of those places. In fact, I was just in Uganda 2 years ago at Rwenzori. So there you see that they acknowledge the little Twa. We talked about them earlier, the first and early people. So these spiritual principles came from our ancestors, okay, from thousands of years, not before Kemet was even Kemet. Thousands of years from their observation of Mut Netchet, okay, or Mother Nature, the spiritual principles that they saw all around them. That's why when you look at the various symbols, okay, in the zoomorphic forms on the temples of ancient Kemet, okay, all that is representation of the Great Lakes regions around the Congo and around that area of Uganda and that area of Africa, okay? It's not representative of Asia. It's not coming from Europe. All those zoomorphic forms and and even symbols, okay, like I spoke of the symbol Murray, okay, where the term Mary came from. Okay, that Kemetic glyph of Murray is like a hoe, okay, that you would plow the land with. All right, now why would they use that to represent Murray? Love, because of the earth giving us food. So here that plow, okay, was called Murray. Now when I take our groups to Ethiopia, there we can see in the Natural History Museum in Addis Ababa, there you see that plow right there, okay, identical to what's carved on the temples and the glyphs of Kemet that becomes the Medu Neter language for Murray, that means love. And this is what's sad, because when we got people running around talking about extraterrestrials came and built Egypt, this is insane. When you go into Africa and you go with the little toile that we talked about, okay, that I visited myself as well, okay, and see all the various symbols and zoomorphic forms, all are represented on the books in stone of ancient Kemet. And this is the insanity that Europeans would love to have Negroes running around talking about extraterrestrials and madness and all this, because as long as our minds are locked up there, we'll never unlock, okay, a lot of that genetic memory bank that's been passed down through our genes, this locked up, dormant, still in us. But it can never be unlocked with us running around, desecrating each other's spirit, okay, calling each other all kind of names, okay, that started on the plantation, okay, or keeping us in mystical worlds and, okay, space aliens. This is the kind of madness that will keep us eternal slaves.
Right. And with that said, if you don't mind, would you say that because of the genetic memory within us and because of the plagiarism of our spirituality, you know, being reintroduced via the Bible and other mechanisms, do you think that's why it resonates with us? Because we do in some way identify with it?
You're absolutely right. We are naturally an innate spiritual people. It's like our mothers, if I can use this analogy, baking a cake. So our mothers bake a cake, is that right? Now she's got to make a decision what kind of icing she's going to put on it, okay? So she puts a white icing on the cake, and it becomes the what? Angel's food cake with a white icing. The essence of the cake is there, but she put a white icing on it. That's what happened to our African spirituality. The essence of who we are as a people, we are naturally, innately a spiritual people. First people on the planet Earth. So that's a naturally innate part of us. So what white supremacy did was put white idolatry over our spirituality for us to worship them and killed our black divinity, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So if I use the analogy of the cake being made, okay, yes, the cake is made, but our black divinity becomes the chocolate icing on the cake. And it's that black divinity that gets us back to our spirituality. So
yes, sir. Well,
that's why we are so receptive, okay, and Europeans know that. That's why they can whip that European version of the Bible out on us and whip that Jesus on us, okay, and we become more Holy Ghost than anybody on the planet.
Right.
Because they know that. They know that we are naturally in a spiritual people. That's the essence of us. But going back to, as I said earlier, that we've got to understand the African Ka, the African spirit, and understand why the Romans brought that Serapis Jesus, because they brought that image of this human character that they created at the Conference of Nicene in 325 AD to stop the understanding of what the spirituality of the Ka was all about. That's why they exterminated all the Gnostics, because the Gnostics understood it was about the resurrection of our spirit, the fight against tyranny and oppression. So imagine if every black man and woman and child out there knew that they are a Ka, translated to today, Christ. Don't put no image of a man or a person. It's about a spiritual part of us, the Ka, the spirit, that would rise up and fight against tyranny and oppression. That means that every time a black Ka or spirit is shot down in the street, like Michael Brown, okay, Eric Gardner, and many others and sisters, then we would rise up our spirit and fight against tyranny and oppression. We wouldn't be running around worshiping a white Jesus and then go to the church and have the same white Serapis Jesus over us. The Romans created that. And it has the same effect as it did back during that time, and that was for spiritual enslavement, where we start to worship that image instead of realizing that we are our own Ka. And these are some of the things that I'm going to be bringing in this presentation in Detroit on December the 3rd. And that's why I titled it The African Spirituality, the Origin of Christianity, and the Birth of the Black Christ. All right? And again, that black Christ represents our black divinity, that we all are our own Christ. Spirit, I'm talking about, our own Ka. And that's what we've got to understand as black men. We can't continue to run around here desecrating our own Ka, our own spirit. We are a representation of each other. So if you don't want somebody else calling you these names, okay, or if you're calling somebody else these names, you're calling yourself all these names. You don't see no Italians running around calling each other Dagos. What's up, my Dago? No, that's why they got a mafia will take care of you, because they know what that does to their race. You don't see no little white Ashkenazi European Jews running around saying, "What's up, my kite? You kite this, you kite that. What's up, MF?" No, that MF, that motherfucker that was set on the plantation because the slave in many cases, okay, was forced to have sex with his own mother. So he was called a motherfucker. He was called a nigger on the plantation. These things we got to deal with now. The enemy has been entertained by us by calling it. It's a whole culture now of that now. It's a whole culture. To keep that slave alive in a well. Keep that slave desecrating his culture like he did on the plantation. This is the real reality. Those Ashkenazi Jews, they're not going to let nobody desecrate their spirit. That's like that movie Straight Outta Compton. The one part in that movie when that little Ashkenazi got mad in the piece when Ice Cube called him a kite in the lyrics. Look how mad he got. Talk about he's going to get the a defamation leg after him. Now, if he can get that mad, because he knows that that's his race, and that if that starts to spread, it can cause the death of his race. But he was happy for thousands of dollars to be given to them to desecrate their names and call each other names. This is the education that we've got to start putting out here to our brothers and sisters out here now. It's in everything. Now it's spreading all over the lecture circuit. I didn't come up in the community with people on the lecture circuit calling each other all kind of names. Yeah, you had it in the culture. You had it in the barbershop. You had it on the basketball field, on the basketball court, okay, and all of that, and on the block. I grew up on the block. I said those names just as much as anybody, but I had to go through a transformation, a kepara, when I got exposed to this African knowledge. So we can't take the African sacred knowledge and then desecrate it with the slave on the plantation. We didn't see Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben, okay, and many others out there calling each other MFs and N's on the lecture circuit. So, again, we're going to be, my wife and I, Netta Hemp, means the Kemetic word for divine wife. I, her Netta Hedge. See, we put divinity in our unity to go into eternity. That's what we've got to do. So her lecture will be Sisters in the Struggle, a tribute to black women liberators, ancient and modern. And she's going to be dealing with the brothers, okay, and the sisters, and showing how the sisters work with the brothers for liberation. And I'll be dealing with African spirituality, the origin of Christianity, the birth of the black Christ. Okay, so I would like to say in the ancient Kemetic language of our ancestors, Teta Ankh Senejeb. That means may you have eternal life, health, and stability, my brothers.